We're here today for the event called Honoring Indigenous Voices, Advancing Women's Empowerment with Harvard Alumni for Global Women's Empowerment, or Global We. Again, my name is Barbara Moreno-Paschal. I'm president of Global We. Our Global We board is as diverse and global as our interests, with representatives in the United States, Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. I live in Ohio, and other Global We board members and advisory council members present both today and virtually live in Turkey, Canada, India, Dubai, and different parts of the US. For those of you in our Zoom room today, I invite you all to indicate in the chat where you're currently based, if you could do so we can learn where everyone's coming in from today. Before we start, I'd also like to take a screenshot for social media for those of us who are present in the Zoom room and also anyone in the room with which the camera covers today. So I will allow our team to let us know when we're going to take that screenshot. So if you want to look at the camera, then we'll have those screenshots taken. So if someone can give us a countdown, that would be great.
I'll do that for the Zoom.
So anyone in the Zoom room who'd like to be in the picture, you can turn on your camera at this time or leave it off, whichever you prefer, and we'll have a countdown for the photos.
Okay.
I'm wondering if we can close the window. Is that something we can do? Thank you. Might be too hard to close. Thank you, though.
3, 2, 1, smiles. One more. Okay, 3, 2, 1, smile. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And that is Arti Gupta, who is the Vice President of Global We. Thank you, Arti. Now, if you're joining us on Zoom and haven't already, please mute yourself so we can begin the program, and type whatever questions you may have in the chat, and the panelists will be able to answer them at the end if we have time. And remember that today, the viewpoints that our honored guests express today are their own and do not reflect or represent the views of Global We or Harvard or the Harvard Alumni Association. Global We strives to carry out our mission in a way that is politically neutral, and we aspire to engage individuals with different views, ideologically and otherwise, to join our efforts in empowering women globally. It's very important to us. At this time, I would now like to introduce the organizer and moderator for today's panel, Dr. Ostera Borska, the Vice Chair of Programming for Global We. Thank you all very much and enjoy the program.
Thank you, Barbara. Good afternoon. It is my deep honor to welcome you to today's panel discussion on honoring Indigenous voices and advancing women's empowerment. Before we begin, I would like to invite one of our esteemed panelists, Jael Brothers, to share our land acknowledgement and offer a few words about its significance for its members and Indigenous communities. This acknowledgement is more than a formality. It's an intentional act of respect and remembrance. It reminds us that spaces in which we gather carry deep histories, traditions, and stories that long to perpetuate us. By recognizing the original stewards of this land, we are not only honoring the resilience and contributions, but also to reaffirm our collective responsibility to listen, to learn, and to walk alongside Indigenous peoples and the ongoing work of healing and empowerment. Jael, the floor is yours. Thank you.
From its origins, our Harvard community has been anchored and enriched by Native and Indigenous peoples from across the Americas and around the world. The land on which Harvard is situated has been a place of learning for millennia, where Native and Indigenous peoples have passed on their culture, history, and traditions from one generation to the next. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which Harvard University stands, the people of the Massachusetts tribe and their elders, past, present, and emerging, and we honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the Massachusetts people. We also acknowledge Harvard's long historical relationships, which have been sometimes complicated and sometimes empowering, with the Nipmuc and Wampanoag peoples, and pay our respects to them. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the thousands of past, present, and emerging Native and Indigenous elders through the Harvard alumni community. Thank you.
Thank you, Jael. We look forward to hearing more from you later on during our panel. We're joined today by a remarkable group of Indigenous leaders, knowledge keepers, and advocates, individuals who carry not only academic expertise, but also ancestral wisdom with lived experience that guide real transformation. They have stood on the front lines of change, preserving culture, advancing policy reform, empowering women and survivors, and courageously challenging systemic inequalities and historical harms that have allowed exploitation to persist. Our goal today is not just to inform, but to ignite action. As you listen, I invite you to consider how your voice, how your platform, and your network can be a part of this global solution. With that, I'm honored to introduce our distinguished panelists. So Elisa is my co-moderator online. She's going to be introducing the panelists online. We have 2 speakers online, and we have 2 here in person. So with that, I'd like to give our 2 panelists in person an opportunity to introduce themselves.
Great. I can start. Thank you, everybody, for joining in person and virtually. My name is Jael Whitney Brothers. I'm a member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and I am the Assistant Director for the Honoring Nations program at the Harvard Project on Indigenous Governance and Development. This program has been around since 1999 and has awarded over 140 tribal government programs for excellence in self-governance and self-determination. And I'm excited to share more about our work today.
Maloli soifua maua malilunga maua lunga emama. Talofa everybody, my name is Therese Lautua. My family is from Samoa, but I was born and raised in Aotearoa in New Zealand. So I have that Polynesian ancestry, but also Irish and Swiss as well. And so I'm here as college fellow in Indigenous religions, so teaching a little bit and doing research.
Great, thank you both. And I would like to introduce Elisa McBull, our marketing chair of Global We, my co-moderator today. She's going to be discussing our panel members online.
Thank you, Estera. I am delighted to be here and to present our speakers who are joining us remotely. There's Dr. Brenda Croft, Professor of Indigenous Art History and Curatorship at the Australian National University in Canberra, and Louise McDonald, Kendall Bear Clan mother for the Mohawk Nation Council, also lovingly known as Mama Bear. Dr. Croft, Brenda, if I may, would you please introduce yourself?
Good morning from Ngambri Ngunnawal country, where I'm privileged to live and work in Australia. I'm a Gurindji Malian Mutpura Chinese, Irish, Scottish woman from my father's side and Anglo-Australian, German, Irish on my mother's side. And it's an honor to be here with you all today. And I thank you for inviting me.
Great. And Mama Bear, would you please introduce yourself?
Segos wa gwego at gona holada gigan is what snow one is a lot of young skana died one is a Lloyd's day. Greetings, call me Mama Bear. Coming to you live from the community of Akwesasne Mohawk Territory. My community straddles Canada, US, Ontario, Quebec, and upstate New York.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Let's get started right away. My first question is for Jael, actually, in-person panelist. Jael, what are the most significant challenges Indigenous women face in achieving social, political, and economic empowerment?
Yeah. This question made me think about my Uncle Cal, who lives in rural Montana. And he recently reached out to me and he shared that he had observed something in his community, that there were a lot of Indigenous women that had been, either kidnapped or murdered. And he was very distraught by this fact. And he was like, do people know about this? Is this like a common problem? Like, we need to raise heck around this. And I was able to share with him some of the ongoing efforts that have been working to address this very specific issue of gender-based violence, what is now known as missing and murdered Indigenous women and peoples. And it is something that we have some progress towards in terms of, like, the Department of Justice has been creating task force to deal with this. Tribal governments have been creating initiatives to deal with it, but it still remains a very pervasive issue. And so one of the reasons why it's a pervasive issue is, for us, we know about it in Indigenous communities, it's like common knowledge, but outside of those communities, people don't always know about that. Additionally, it's a problem that's rooted in systemic factors as well as interpersonal ones. So just to give a little bit of data, homicide is the third leading cause for death for Native American women. It's not a leading cause at all, for example, for white women. It is a serious issue, and it is rooted in a history of colonization, and specifically an attitude of Indigenous women's bodies as either an obstacle to remove or a commodity to exploit. There is no room for the humanness and the flourishing of Indigenous women within that model. And so this ideology has sort of seeped into a lot of different systems and created a kind of dehumanization. And that dehumanization is what really influences violence against Indigenous women.
Thank you, Jill, and we will discuss more of that throughout the event. Mama Bear, my next question is for you. How do some specific Native American cultural practices and ancestral beliefs, such as ceremonies, storytelling, or spiritual traditions, influence your strategies for empowering Indigenous women today?
Whew, well, that's a powerful and very important question. Our ceremonial and cultural practices and our ancestral stories and beliefs is rooted deeply in community, identity, and resilience. And I think it's vital in shaping any strategy to empower Indigenous women. I think ceremonies are healing. It's about reclamation, like sweat lodges, moon ceremonies, coming of age ceremonies, any spiritual practices that allows women to be women and to cycle with nature. It reinforces our identity and belonging. It provides healing spaces, and it celebrates our womanhood to our fullest capacity. And I'd like to say authority. If you're Haudenosaunee women have been long known for their foundational strength and wielding of liberty and justice within our societies.
Thank you so much. I'm going to actually pass it to Estera now for our second round of questions.
Thank you, Eliza. Brenda, the next question is for you. How can interdisciplinary research and storytelling be used to amplify Indigenous women voices and experiences in Australia?
Excuse me. The work that I do crosses over many disciplines within the academy, but foregrounded in that for me is working with community members, regardless of where I'm living or working. It was a tenet taught to me by my father. He was a member of the Stolen Generations, removed from his mother and community when he was a young child. And we were fortunate, if that's the term, to be reunited with family when I was a young girl with his mother. So for me, growing up in with the support of both my parents in terms of community, it's been essential for me wherever I'm living and working to work with local community. And that's what I endeavoured to do when I was lucky enough to be at Harvard in 2024, was to work with local community and through the Native American program there at Harvard. I have always, as a curator, as an artist, as a project manager in the field that I work in, it's not simply Centres Arts and Culture, it's also always bringing the politics into the frame. And the first speaker who was talking about the trauma and tragedy facing Native and Indigenous women in North America and Canada is something that's also experienced here in Australia. And one of the exhibitions that I worked on with a number of colleagues back in 2011, I worked with First Nation Native American curator Kathleen Ash Milby from the US, David Garneau from Canada, Métis curator and art historian, and Megan Tamati Quinnell from Aotearoa. And one of the artists who was represented in that exhibition, Rebecca Belmore, had an installation that specifically referenced missing, disappeared and murdered First Nations women in Canada. And I can use creative ways and story work, critical Indigenous performative and collaborative methods of telling our stories, and bring that into a creative space to inform the broader public what's happening to our communities and particularly to our women here.
Wow, thank you, Brenda. That was really beautifully said. I think the power of story, like you were saying, even for yourself as an artist and someone who brings the power of storytelling to these really deep-rooted issues is so beautiful. I had a chance to kind of look at that exhibit, and it was really, you guys did an amazing job at really telling the story, and it was so profound. So thank you for that work. I think that story continues to bring awareness and create space for all of the voices that need to be enlightened and heard across the globe. So thank you for doing that, especially through art. All right, my next question is here in person for Therese. So in what ways can policy changes better support Indigenous women in leadership, education, and even healthcare?
Well, I'll just kind of set the scene a little bit. In Aotearoa yesterday, estimated about 100,000 teachers and healthcare professionals collectively were striking for pay equity. And so I think the first thing thinking about policy changes is around pay equity, particularly for Māori and Pasifika women. This is from, our diaspora context in Aotearoa. So say, for example, some of the unions found that last year, for every dollar that a European male made, Pasifika women only made 75 cents. And for Māori women, they made 81 cents equivalent. So it's definitely, there's the nexus or this crossing point of ethnic identity, indigeneity, and pay equity for women. And then the second thing I think around healthcare, I guess I would just share my own story around maternal health and maternal health care. I think there needs to be more shift towards, allowing midwives to incorporate Indigenous knowledge into their care, which obviously is informed by Western science. So our family, we've got 2 daughters. And so our antenatal programs were done by Māori midwives. And so we learned, for example, like in our Samoan culture, the name for placenta, whanua, is the same as the word for land, which is also whanua. So when baby is born, you bury the placenta, the whanua, in the whanua. So for us, I think just having that empowering experience of, if you don't have any complications around pregnancy and you can give birth without medical assistance, then I think training more Indigenous midwives in our medicinal and around maternal health is really important and something that I would hope for more in the future.
Thank you. All right, Elisa, I will take it back to you now to ask our panelists the last question.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions here, and I would present it to all our panelists, and please take turn 1 or 2 minutes to answering each of the questions. What are the key factors contributing to the high rates of missing and murdered Indigenous women? And how can communities and policymakers address them effectively? Brenda, would you like to start?
Well, that's a very heavy question. It's certainly not my area of focus. Hannah McGlade, who's an incredible First Nations academic, an activist here in Australia, has been advocating loudly and for a very long time on the rates of domestic violence, high rates of domestic violence and murder that's been happening to First Nations women here in Australia. I would say the causes behind that are poverty, racism, the lack of care from the judicial system. In Australia, we make up just around 3% of the population, yet in every state and territory, the numbers of our people incarcerated are in the very high numbers. In some states and territories, it's up there in the 70% area. We have had a royal commission into Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander deaths in custody that was done in 1992. There were many recommendations that came out of that. Very few have been implemented. In that time, there have been more people that have been killed in custody. And that's an ongoing issue here. The number of women who have children removed, the rates of our children removed in out-of-home care has been growing exponentially, despite the activism of our communities. I think the government policies that operate in most of the states and territories here leave a lot to be answered, and in particular where my community is in the Northern Territory of Australia, it's the Gurindji people live in the Victoria River region. It's a remote community. Family and community members who are up there have to deal with impossible conditions of accommodation. There's a lack of accommodation, overcrowding for communities. The judicial system that comes in and removes our children in the Northern Territory, they are as young as 10 years old who are incarcerated. That age was fought to be pushed up to 12 years old, and the Conservative government that got in there recently brought it back down to 10 years old. So we're seeing this kind of punitive action constantly across all sectors of our communities, and it leaves me to question how I can have any kind of impact or effect working in the area that I do in the academy. For me, I try and draw together all elements of our communities, and that's men as well as women and youth. But it's an issue that is ongoing here, and it's certainly one that we share with our sisters overseas as well.
No, definitely, it's a painful reality and a tragic ongoing situation in Australia and wherever Indigenous people are, of course, North America. Mama Bear, I would like to ask you to elaborate on this too, the key factors that are contributing to missing and murdered Indigenous women, and how can policymakers and community address them effectively?
Yeah, well, I think on multiple levels. Can you hear me? Yeah. This is kind of like a real heavy topic, because living on the reservation, we're compounded with so many issues. And I think the limited media coverage of issue in the matter, it's like, unless you're a white woman, you don't qualify to be in media. So if you're black or brown or any other color, especially Indigenous, we're considered the pond scum of society. So we just don't make headlines, right? And even though it's a travesty and a national disgrace, it just doesn't reach main media. And it's only those of us who are in the field experience it are really the ones saying anything about it. And you know, it's a historical racism, I think, deeply embedded in the doctrine of discovery. And we can't forget that poisonous doctrine that unleashed itself on the Americas and has stolen our children, and who have really taken our women from being mothers. And I think that's really important to address the gender-based violence. And in addition to that, you know, one of the beginning questions, you know, why pick on Indigenous women? And I know for the Haudenosaunee specifically, is that the title of the land is vested in the mothers of our nations, not the fathers. So because our matrilineal descent, our matrilineage goes to the mother, European central thinking, male thinking, has always been about destroying the Indigenous mother and the Indigenous woman. So if he can rid the land of the ultimate authority and the holder of the allodial title to the land, then he can have absolute control and power. But as long as she exists, then liberty and justice exist. So that's where the balance is in Haudenosaunee society, is the mother is the referee, and she's also the one that hands down the inheritance to the children, not the father. So unless societies begin to make mother the center of our societies, again, we'll continue to suffer this fate and also hand it over to our daughters and our granddaughters. So I think there has to be a unified front with the families who are experiencing this, and on a global front, Indigenous women have to lead a movement to bring solution to this very drastic experience that we're all experiencing.
Beautifully said, and such an excellent point you've made. I would ask Therese the same question. Therese, can you please give us your point of view?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for the previous answers that were very articulate, and I agree 100% with them. From Oceania, I guess last year in October, UNICEF, they released a report saying that women and children experience the highest rates of gender-based violence, sexual abuse in proportion to their population in the whole world, which was 34%, or about 6 million women, which is, I find that incredible. For a region, for us, Christianity is the dominant religion, so about 95% of the islands in our communities are Christian. And I think this is what my research is about most of the time, is what does it mean to be Indigenous and Christian at the same time, with the legacy of the doctrine of discovery and all the harm that Christianity has caused our communities. So I think while our communities might have absorbed like the life-giving parts of Christianity, at the same time, people in the Pacific have also adopted all the negative aspects, a colonial mindset, which is, you know, about greed and taking and control, which has flowed into marriage relationships and in our family settings. And I think another aspect that is significantly harming the Pacific is hard drug use is now infiltrated our islands. So the use of cocaine, because drug cartels have come through places like Fiji and Tonga and Samoa. This breakdown of family structures, not only from a religious and spiritual side, but also from that side as well. So I think a thing for policymakers is to really consider the importance of spiritual and religious leaders in creating policy, because at least in Oceania, the churches have big sway on the hearts and minds of the people. So to make policy without consulting Indigenous spiritual leaders leaves us sort of bereft in going forward. Yeah.
That's a really great point. Jael, would you like to add on to that, please?
Yeah, this is a very personal question for me, as my grandmother is somebody that I would categorize as a murdered Indigenous woman. And I think about the question in that context: what caused that? What led to that? Is there anything that could have been done? And I think one of the things that would be of benefit for both policymakers and community supporters is mobilizing funding towards supports for mental health, for trauma-informed care, for amplifying the voices of not only the victims of these violent acts, but also their families and their communities, and offering those same acts of care to those communities as well. I think accountability for perpetrators, especially because a lot in the United States, there are serial offenders, serial killers of Indigenous women, and having earlier available data for those incidences and more appropriate urgency given to those cases, I think is something that would be really beneficial. I also think this issue is contextual based on where an Indigenous woman is living. If you're in a very isolated, rural, remote community with little access to public safety resources in general, that's going to be a very different issue than maybe living in an urban community, but not having connection to community members, not having a support network, not having that family structure there, those resources that would know that something was going on and could intervene earlier on.
Thank you so much. I have one more question for all of you. We just spoke of, how communities and policymakers can address it. This is how can survivor and family voices be incorporated into investigations and policy initiatives to ensure justice and healing for missing Indigenous women and the families of murdered Indigenous women. Therese, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. I think so. Sort of going off me talking about bearing the placenta and our spiritual connection to the land, and the dominance of Christianity in the Pacific. I think when we adopt like a settler colonial view of the land where it's ready to be taken, that's also reflective of how we treat our women, as our panelists have said. And so in my class today, we were watching a documentary called The Forgotten Pacific. And so I think it's about the climate crisis, which is the biggest issue, one of the biggest issues in the Pacific, alongside gender-based violence. And so to counteract gender-based violence in the Pacific, it's also to deal with the climate crisis. So in this documentary that featured women in the Marshall Islands who were weaving their traditional fine mats out of pandanus leaves, which are like soaked and then they're dried and beaten and then woven into shape. But because of increased salination of soil and droughts, the materials to make these parts, these mats, which are so crucial to their cultural identity, they're getting more and more sparse. And another sort of cloth in the Pacific that is used in many ceremonial occasions is the tapa cloth, which also known as kapa or siapo hiapo, made from the mulberry bark of the mulberry tree. And this is normally seen as like women's work. And this is a safe place for them to tell stories. And so this weaving of mats and these cloths done by a woman, one Samoan Methodist theologian, she's probably the only female theologian that outwardly counteracts gender-based violence in our communities. And so she came up with a resource in the last couple of years where she used the image of rolling out the fine mat, where everybody, men and women, sit on the same mat and they're breaking open biblical texts that talk about rape and gender-based violence, but through a Samoan lens. So I think for policymakers, it's important to, one, contribute to help fighting the climate crisis, but two, also consider solutions that use our own material culture that are so important to our ceremonies and our life celebrations as part of the solution going forward.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's such a great correlation. We often don't think about it, but the environment and then related to the environment of women. Thank you so much for that, Therese. Jael, how do you think that the voices of survivors or their families can be incorporated into investigating and ensuring justice and healing?
I think for any organization that is working to support Indigenous communities, whether directly or indirectly through public safety, through mental health, whatever the resource may be, I think it's important to move beyond the families and the victims as like a source of data or like anecdotes and into real relationship that is ongoing and meaningful and transformative for all parties involved. I think moving beyond bullet points into real relationships, I think is really important for this space.
Brenda, if you'd like to add on.
I've been thinking a lot with listening to everybody else, and I don't want to come up with the deficit or the negative constantly, but I just went to a conference yesterday here at the ANU, which was an amazing conference with First Nations women, Indigenous women from Australia and the Pacific, and also North America and Canada. And it was such an empowering space to be in. And we were talking about how we are in those spaces and then we leave them and go out back into what is the real world, which is where everything that's centered is from a Western and increasingly, it seems, a patriarchal context. And how, for me, talking about how the older I get, the angrier I seem to feel at the lack of effective change that is happening. There's a feeling within many of our communities, I think, that we're often in Groundhog Day, to use that analogy, where we've been saying what's been needed for decades. Our people before me, I stand on the shoulders of giants. They have been reiterating what is most important. And all of the speakers here have said that it's listening to the community. It's actively engaging with the community. It's not telling us what to do. It's letting us direct what has to be done. And we can see that this is falling on deaf ears a lot of the time, particularly in the Northern Territory where my family is from. I just don't understand the policymakers who think punishment is going to affect any change. I've been listening to this story for so long. I've seen it in my immediate family. You have to engage with us. We have to be the ones who direct what happens and changes. And that's at every level. And for our women and particularly our children, I've got a 14-year-old son, and I call him my son, but he came from an out-of-home care. He's a family member. There's been a century of enforced removal in my family, and I just don't want to see that keep on happening. I want to see some change. I look to my elders for guidance and advice. I have a loud voice, and I'm not frightened to use that voice, and I use it within the academy and outside as much as I can. But it's us directing the changes. We have to be at every table. That's we're not there knocking on the door asking to be listened to. We need to be in there talking at talking with the people who set the rules and regulations, which keep getting shifted and changed. But they have to listen to us. Otherwise, we're just going to be going around and around in circles, and we can see that happening globally with changes in administration right across the globe, and it's not affecting anything that's positive for Indigenous peoples.
I absolutely agree, and it's kind of related to a question that I have as a follow-up, and if we have time, we will ask you that, but thank you so much for that, Brenda. Mama Bear, how do you think that survivor and family voices can be incorporated into investigations and policy initiatives to ensure justice and healing for missing and murdered Indigenous?
Well, from where I sit in the work that I do, being in the trenches with women, nobody is coming to save us. So legislation or policy, it don't matter. You know what I mean? You can scream that all day. It's not going to work. Unless we begin to change the narrative, well, we begin to change the experience of what our women are experiencing. So I believe it has to come from within, and we have to begin to raise our sons better because we're responsible for that. And I believe that we have to empower our young women to understand their sexuality, to understand their strength, their position and their place in our societies, and what they're responsible for. And also to back each other up. Here in Akwesasne, where the men are men and women are too, because, you know, missing and murdered isn't, it happens here, but the statistic isn't really high. The women in my community are scarier than the men. So, you know, I mean, we can pressure tribal governments to investigate and persecute crimes on our lands and to hold it to the wall. You know, we can improve the data collection, we can increase funding, we can enhance law enforcement, we can raise public awareness, you know, we can continue this ongoing narrative. But to me, nobody's coming to save us. And unless we begin to stand up for ourselves and stand through within our power, well, anything really change. And for me, all Indigenous women got to walk our lands like we own it, because we do. And we can't be submissive to the colonial powers that continue to exert its illegitimate assumption of superiority and authority over us. So I believe in wholehearted, a good old ass kicking at the end of the day. It's not a bad thing, you know. So we're rough and tough and hard to bluff here on the res, and that's why I love to work with young ladies in our puberty rite ceremony, because that's what I like to infuse them with is some real grit.
Thank you so much. And I think this is very much related to another question that we had. So I'm just going to ask you, because we do have a few minutes and I think we can get to it. So as I said, very much related, how do we ensure that Indigenous people remain central to their issues being discussed without exploiting their culture or identities? And course, I mean people who are not Indigenous or Native American or from Australia, Indigenous people who are trying to help you, but they shouldn't come across as exploiting your identity or your culture. Can each of you give me like some specific examples of how outsiders can help? Jael, would you like to go?
Sure. I think with the sort of stereotypical narratives about Indigenous women, there's a spectrum. There's some which focus on how vulnerable our populations are, you know, poverty and all of those things, and that we need to save them, we need to rescue them. That's not a good narrative to carry on. There's also on the other end of the spectrum, there can be a form of like inspiration porn, or like, we're going to put you up on this pedestal. You have everything that we need and you can share it with us and then we'll get what we need. And it's like an extractive relationship, even though it comes from this like quote unquote positive lens. And so that's another narrative that we want to avoid. And again, that's why I go back to relationships, because I think relationships are the antidote to dehumanization. It's like when you can see somebody else as a person that has needs and wants and strengths and weaknesses and all of those things together, I think we need more of that in our narratives in general, but especially for Indigenous women and how we work together.
Excellent. I fully agree. Therese, would you like to add on to?
Yeah, that's a beautiful answer. I would say, I guess, being someone who's not Indigenous to Aotearoa, but someone like the Pasifika community has been in Aotearoa for a long time, and we're like sort of seen as cousins really in our relationship. Last year there was aside from yesterday's protest, the largest protest against the government trying to change the principles of our sort of founding document, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, between the British Crown and Māori who are Indigenous. And so that those peaceful demonstrations, they had people, not just Māori, but Pasifika, people of Asian descent, people of Pākehā, you know, like European. And it took time to learn what the issues are in the community. Like the treaty was signed in 1840, and it's taken this long for many people to understand the grievances. And there's still obviously a lot of work to go. But in terms of how that fits into the experience of women, I think at the heart of it is like, what is the issues that are going on within your own society? Like how do we even begin to change the narrative if we can't be bothered to listen and take the time to learn? Yeah.
Thank you. And Brenda?
Well, some of you may be familiar with the voice referendum that was held in Australia back in 2023, which was a decade at least of advocacy for First Nations representation to Parliament. It got a resounding no. It kind of, there was no bipartisan support from the two major parties. I didn't expect that anyway, but the resounding no basically unleashed really overt racism in that period. Since that came out on the 14th of October in 2023. And so we've seen a rise of the right in Australia. We've seen a rise of white nationalism. We've seen rallies happening in Australia. We need people to walk alongside us, not in front of us, alongside us and behind us, and to listen to us, not to culturally extract from us. To be a good ally is about deep listening. It's not culturally extracting. I have to say this to my colleagues all the time within the academy. It can be a very culturally unsafe space. So yesterday was such a haven and a sanctuary, I think, for all of us to be together. And it is that thing that the rest of the speakers have talked about, and particularly what Therese just said. Therese just said was listening, not speaking on our behalf. So to be a good ally is to learn humility, I think, and to take some time to educate yourself. Stop asking us for the answers all the time. Go and take the time to educate yourself. There is plenty of information out there. I say this to my students. I get frustrated with people coming through and saying, I didn't know. Well, the information has been there for a very long time. So it's not expecting to be spoon-fed what we're doing. And so we can do that through a multitude of avenues. I work in the academic space, I work in the creative space, I work in the writing space, but taking the time to really listen to us.
Yes, humility, listening, and self-educating. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Mama Bear, what do you think?
Yeah, well, that's a pretty loaded question. Allyship. Well, I guess you gotta move at the speed of trust. And I think in any given moment when you get an inkling that they're just there to monetize your culture and to advance themselves based on your culture, because we see a lot of that here. But for me, the narrative is deeply rooted in their own historical knowing. And it seems like they created our genocide, but we're left to clean it up. And so they're still trying to get the answers from us on how to absolve their feelings of guilt, the white guilt that has been unleashed around the planet. So the way that I view it is that, you know, they have to build trust within us again. And there is some good meaning white people out there. And, you know, I reflect upon a particular moment when I was sitting in prayer at a sunrise ceremony, and I was sitting right next to a Roman Catholic nun who reached over to me in the middle of my prayer, which I was immediately annoyed by because here I'm praying and she's interrupting my prayer. But anyway, she started to apologize what her people and what her faith has done to my people. And I looked her straight in the eye. I said, I can't accept that apology because it's just words. Until you begin to back up what you're saying, I can't believe you. So this month on November 9th, the Roman Catholic Order of Nuns is returning some indigenous land to the original owners. So I called her out on her apology. So I think when you know, allies, you got to call them out and they got to own their truth, I believe, and their historical truth, not just from their view as the supposed victors of all that is right in the world, but also all that is wrong in the world. So for me, you know, you gotta call them out and prove to us that they're sincere, and you know, because other than that, it's just bullshit.
Well, thank you all very much for a thoughtful and informative discussion on Indigenous women and for answering some pressing questions. Unfortunately, Brenda, I know, has to sign off now to start off her day in Australia.
Oh no, not yet. I'm
still
fine
have
for
some
another
time?
15
Okay,
minutes.
that is great. Thank
Sorry.
you. No, that's
It's
absolutely fine. We don't want to hold you back.
oh, no, it's morning here and my son will get up shortly, so I've got to get him ready for school.
Yes, and at any moment when you feel like you have to go, don't worry. We just wanted to thank you so
Good.
much. And I will now let the audience ask questions. Those of you who are in the room, please feel free to raise your hand. And Sarah will ask those questions and address them to the panelists for you. And our virtual attendees, if you would like to please put your questions on chat, we can present them to the panelists as well.
Thank you so much, Eliza. So we'll start our Q&A. I just want to say thank you to all of our panelists before we even start Q&A, because those were all really profound questions. The things that stood out to me the most were listening and relationship and being able to stand by and allyship and no BS. I also heard no BS, and that rebuilding trust is very important. And you know, as a mental health professional, I really appreciated the comments about, you know, about really understanding trauma-informed care. That I call BS on that as a mental health professional, because that doesn't mean anything really. You have to understand and sit with people and really understand what it is underneath. One of the most profound research studies I've ever read said that 99% of our behaviors are rooted in our sense of identity and how we feel about ourselves. And incidentally, that is the two impacts of trauma: how we feel about ourselves and how we view the world. And until we can sit there as the one human race, stand by each other and say, I understand you because you understand me. And we can sit and understand each other's stories and understand the deep impact of emotional wounds, and that those are all the same. It doesn't change by color, it doesn't change by geographics or even everything else. And when we can build. That's, I think, trust is built on respect. And when we can do that, things start to shift and people start to change and healing starts to happen. And so I'm so proud of this panel and what you guys brought out in this amazing discussion. So as you think of questions, I just wanted to highlight some of those key points because it was truly beautiful. So thank you. Can we actually give a round of applause online in here, please? I'm deeply moved by that. Thank you so much. So let's start with questions in the room. Does anyone have any question here in the room? If you'd like to ask a question, please do so. Speak up and ask your question. Any questions in the room?
Well, I had a
Yeah.
question. But what really resonated with me was how we're criminalizing poverty, essentially, in the indigenous communities, where they're victims simply for being poor. And also, Mama Bear, what you said about allyship, it needs to be more than mere words. So I'm wondering, as allies, what can we do to sort of change the thinking when it comes to poverty? That people aren't criminals because they're poor; they need help. So, as allies, what can we do from a policy perspective or even a human perspective? So, Mama Bear, I'll make you answer that one, okay?
Well, there's an old wise saying here in my community: if you feed a child fish, you feed him for a day, but if you teach a child how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. So policy, I don't think there's any policy, but I think it's the empowerment of each community to reassert and recapture their indigenous ways of knowing, and to create the space for them and to make it matter. You know, I think that's so important, is to allow the creation of reconstructing our old ways and reinfusing it into our young people. Because, you know, at the policy level, at the legislative level, you know, it's just, it doesn't cut it. It has to be on the ground, in the trenches, sunrise to sunset, moonrise to moonset. It has to be where the river flows, where the grass grows, and it has to be all hands on deck in order to shift that paradigm. I believe I'm all about action.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions in the room? Yes, we have another question in the room. Then we'll go to online. Please.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I live in the Bay Area, where there's a lot of talk about AI, and it's very, very present right now. And I, you know, as I was hearing some of your concerns in the, you know, in your communities, and the mental health challenges that women are facing, I'm wondering your thoughts on AI, and if you think that there is a space for ChatGPT or these other platforms to be able to facilitate some dialogue, healing, or some type of possibility of exchange to promote healing in the community. What are your thoughts around that? As so many young people are, you know, tapping into ChatGPT to ask their, you know, to work through their problems.
Yeah.
So I identify as an AI evangelist, by which I mean I used to sell like B2B SaaS software that was AI driven, and that was like my profession. And I used to give talks on AI, and I used to be very like, yes, AI is the future, it's great. As time has gone on, as the advent of generative AI has gone on, what I have observed in the ways that the structures are being put in place that are environmentally degrading, and these data centers are horrible for the environment that are building these systems, the way that the algorithms that we have now have people telling them to kill themselves. I think that the idea that what we're facing is an issue of dehumanization, and let's go to a tool that's not a human to try to fix this problem, I think is like I think it's frightening on one hand. On the other hand, because if we had more information, maybe we could move quicker to solve these issues. Like, is there an opportunity for AI to maybe help with that aspect, like a data specific problem? Maybe. But I think in terms of the very human problems, I would not trust it where it's at right now.
Nope.
Yeah. Anyone else want to make a comment on that? And then we'll switch to online and come back. We have another question here in the room. So any other speakers feel encouraged to answer that, or should we move to the next question?
I'll say something on AI.
Okay.
I hate it. I from the look, I've used ChatGPT to help me just do some basic writing, but honestly, the less face-to-face that we're having, I can see that within what's happening with my students, the less interaction that's happening face-to-face, and we need human interaction. And for me, it's also thinking about how a really simple solution, to my mind, maybe I'm naive and dumb, over here in Australia is, I met with some young Indigenous rangers, people who are working on country, caring for country. If there was the amount of money that's thrown into the justice system here to punish people and to jail people and to put our children in detention, if that money was put into programs for our young people to be working on country, we would be solving a lot of the problems that are here in terms of displacement, disaffection, lack of respect for elders. I watch how young people who are engaged with country and working with programs on country, you can see their pride lifting. I'm working on a big project at the moment, which is an Indigenous health and wellbeing project through multidisciplinary creative-led, and it's walking on country. We're doing a whole series of sovereign walks, working with communities to access material that are held in archives that they haven't been able to access, bringing stories from those communities to the public arena. And this is a little bit off track, but if we keep relying on AI and ChatGPT, we become more and more isolated. I just see this as, I don't see any positives with it at all, I'm afraid.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Lisa, do you see any questions online, or if someone can unmute themselves and ask? I saw someone's hand.
Yes, we have some online questions. Benny, I know you put in the chat. Did you want to add on to your comment or ask the question? I think you're muted. We will.
Hello?
There you-
Hello? Can you
Yes.
hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. So I'll my question is more like a comment, but the question has been asked by the gentleman, that what are the policies that Mama Bear would love to see? How can, instead of the mere words of apology, what can actually be put into perspectives or into place to address things and bring about healing, to Indigenous. But I think if the Indigenous can actually write about this stuff, write books on them, I'm sure various Indigenous, maybe their parents, or their grandparents, mother have gone through some things. If they can put this as a book, the healing starts there. Write this thing out, make it public, have a book club to discuss these things, and send write letters to policymakers, make suggestions about policies that can address and bring about healing results to indigents. That will go a great deal, I think.
You're muted, Elisa.
Sorry. Thank you so much for that. I believe Allison, you had a question in chat. If not, I can move on to our question that's actually from our President America. She wants to know from Leah Keen. She wants to know, how are you engaging the young women and empowering them to take control of their lives and take leadership roles in their communities in the geographic areas you represent? Brenda, do you want to go ahead, since I know you have to leave shortly?
Sorry, I was reading the chat notes. What was that last one?
Oh, sure. It's how are you engaging young women and empowering them to take control of their lives and take leadership roles in their communities in your area, in your geographic area?
I've always loved mentoring. I've never been a lone worker. Wherever I worked, I've worked hard to get funding to bring young women in particular, who've worked in the creative sector. I love working with all our youth, but I think giving people an opportunity. I was given lots of opportunities. I had great mentors, and I really believe in paying that forward. I've been really lucky to have really good women mentors, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and I have made sure I've thanked them personally for the time and effort they put into me. And I see that it's an obligation I have to do that for younger people coming through. And I really look to actively work with young women. There are a lot of opportunities available to me that aren't there now for people. And I think I'm in a position of privilege within the academy, but also just generally where I am, and it's a role of advocacy, and it'll be a lifelong role. It's something that was taught to me, and it's something that I have to do. I can't face myself each day if I'm not looking to how I can generate some positive outcomes for the people who've let me live on their land. I'm a visitor to where I'm living now, and for me, it's about paying back as well as paying forward.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Brenda. What about our other panelists? Would you like to describe what kind of work is being done to empower the young women and giving them leadership roles? JL?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. I agree, mentorship is very important. I think even just building relationships with young people, creating opportunities for young people to come visit. We've had opportunities to have tribal leaders visit our program at the Harvard Project on Indigenous Governance Development to learn, but they've brought along the people that are going to be their successors, the next generation of leaders. And so I think thinking about Indigenous women as that for young women, the next generation of leaders, and how can we not only invest in them as whole people and wholeheartedly, but also like what skills will they need to fill these positions in the future? And now too, I think there as a young Indigenous woman, there can be sometimes a bit of like ageism around, do I have the necessary experience? On top of am I Indigenous enough to even be in this space right now? There are so many like conflicting identity issues, especially for young Indigenous women, especially Indigenous women that are just starting out in undergrad. So I think supporting resources that uplift young Indigenous women is really important. And I'm glad that it was brought up.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you so much. Have a great
Bye.
We're really
Lisa, we have a question in the room. Can we move back to us here?
Yes, absolutely. And then we do
Okay.
have another virtual question.
Okay, great. You had a question? If anyone else has one, let me know, but I think you are next.
With the current administration where misogyny and discrimination is much more important now, that and then so many executive orders on immigration, citizenship, and cuts in funding that's also affecting Indigenous people. What are the ways that we are taking to navigate these new waters, or what steps can we make to kind of go around and address these attacks on Indigenous women and people?
I'm happy to take that one first. I think understanding our spheres of influence is really important in this. Knowing who can you influence, like in real life, who can you, like if you see something, can you say something? Like I think keeping it grounded in that reality on one hand is really important. And just having those small moments of like, hey, I noticed this, like just engaging them relationally, like this is maybe not great. And like having on your own built the skills necessary to do that with love and with respect. On the other hand, like staying informed about what's going on with the bigger picture And then I think something that's a really important tool in this day and age is imagination. Like, how are we imagining the past, the present, the future? Like, what I think with everything that's going on, it can be really easy to start imagining a very dystopic and terrible future. But it's like we need to remember to imagine a future that is what we want, because that's how we'll know what we need to do to get there. And so I think that's another important thing is continuing to imagine better futures than what is going on right now.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to touch on that, or should we move on to the last question online? How are we doing on time, Eliza?
We are good. We can answer more questions in the chat. Allison, did you want to ask your question? You should be unmuted now.
Okay, yes, thank you very much for giving me the floor. My name is Allison Moses. I'm a Caribbean American. I hope everyone can hear me. This is through a computer, so once again, we have that impersonal aspect, but we are all here together. And am I right when I say Mama Bear? Is that correct? Did I hear that correctly? Good. Because you spoke about changing the narrative, and for decades, as a Caribbean American, as a Black American, Black Caribbean American, I have been talking about changing the profile for many, many moons. And it is a very difficult thing to do. And it's very similar to changing the narrative. So my specific question is, what intentional steps would you take to start to change the narrative come profile so that you and your community and other Indigenous women communities can be heard, can be better understood, and then slide into more mainstream so that people can generally understand and not hide the true history?
Was that a question for me, Allison?
Yes, please.
I think one of the things is we have to be the living embodiment of who we are authentically. And I think sometimes we spend a lot of time trying to emanate modern culture or to be cookie cutter like everybody else. And I think that's what our young teen girls fall into the trap of, trying to be like everybody else, when we're so unique and so beautiful just as we are. And I think part of that is to pour a lot of love into our young women to understand their worth. And one of the best things that I do in the work that I do on the ground with our young nieces in our puberty rite ceremony is I have them go ask an auntie to be part of her journey as she goes out into the land to fast for 4 days and 4 nights. And she's got to give her auntie a tobacco tie. And what she'll say to her auntie is, can you come and be part of my journey, witness my journey and help me? And can you love me until I can learn how to love myself? And I think that's one is the most profound statements that we use over and over again, because women are taught to hate themselves because we don't look like the women in the magazines that our young girls are looking at, and we don't embrace the true authentic color of our skin and our hair and our eyes. We're always trying to emanate something that isn't us. So to me, if we can return to the truth of our grandmothers and live authentically and turn that pain into power and promote that within our young girls and just give them worth. And I think a lot of times is that we don't put worth in our own skin, because I remember a teacher saying to me in 4th grade, who was a white man, who brought his blonde hair, blue-eyed, leather patent shoe wearing, yellow flower dress daughter in, and said to me, he says, "This is what young girls should look like." And I never forgot that. So he diminished my own worth in 4th grade when I started to emanate and tried to be like a white girl. And it took me years to unravel that. So now I try to authentically show up as a Mohawk woman, clan mother, mother, grandmother, wife, sister, daughter, and not make excuses for it, and fully enter in my own power. And I encourage all women, even white women, to do that. You know what I mean? Because we're always standing in somebody else's shadow, and we don't stand in our own light. So for me, that is taking control and empowering them to take control of their own lives so that they become the leaders that we pray about every day. Because somebody prayed for me, and it's the exposure. Like it took a Wolf Clan Mohawk midwife to take me to the tables where policies and legislation was being written. She made me read. She took me to DC. She took me to Sundance circles. She took me to ceremony, to peyote ceremonies. You know, she took me and exposed me to the greater world of the Indigenous woman, and also to the world beyond. But I also tell my young girls, it's not about us changing the world. It's not letting the world change us, and let us authentically be who we are as Indigenous women.
Thank you.
Wow,
Thank you. That was beautiful.
beautiful. Estera, I will hand it over to you back in the room for you to do the closing, or if you have any slides too.
Yeah, perfect. Well, that kind of concludes our panel part, but I just want to maybe give another round of applause to our speakers because that was really beautiful. Thank you. I especially really like this last part about identity because, 80% of mental health disorders are related to identity and how we feel about ourselves. It starts that mental decline that happens, especially in women, and due to trauma. And so I love that practice that you guys have around mentorship and around speaking into young women and saying that you're beautiful and that you're good. Because that's what truly will make a difference. So again, thank you all. And we're going to move to the next part and closing. So I would like to, give me 1 second. Just want to make sure I properly introduce our next speaker because that part is very important. So I would like to introduce you all to Jordan Clark. I would like to introduce Jordan Clark, the Executive Director of the Harvard University Native American Program, who will tell us a little bit more about Indigenous-centered organizations at Harvard and how you can get involved. So without further ado, I'd like to invite him up.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jordan Clark. I'm the Director of the American Program here at Harvard, and I'm also a citizen of the Wampanoag tribe of Florida. I think I start this without acknowledging that I come from a matriarchal society, and so standing up here and talking after all of that, I hope it is complementary to what you all have heard. I think the way I see this connection is that a lot of our amazing speakers talked about the importance of places.
Pardon me, Jordan, sorry to interrupt. Can you please come closer because the virtual people are unable, or maybe take the mic from Estera? Sorry, thank you so much.
Can folks hear me now online? Yes? Perfect. So one of the things that I think connects kind of my piece to this is the importance of place and space. You heard that a lot with our speakers. And so for us who are connected to the university, understanding what it means to be here and our responsibility and what's happening with Native nations here, I think is a really important connector. So I know we might have slides. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. So HUNAP has existed in its current form since 1970, so over 55 years. But Harvard's relationship and responsibility to Native people goes back to its very founding. Again, I'm a citizen of the Wampanoag tribe of Aquinnah. Prior to contact, the Wampanoag Nation was 70 distinct villages ranging from northern Rhode Island all the way up to the North Shore of Massachusetts. And so I have the honor and the responsibility and the privilege of working at a university that had direct contact and impact on my community and many others from this region. Since its founding in 1636, Harvard has had impacts on Native peoples here. At its founding, it is not the financial juggernaut that it is today. It's a struggling institution. And so in 1650, it rewrites its charter and it reorganizes its leadership, but it strategically puts a line in its charter that says that Harvard is going to educate both the English and Indian youth of this country. And that was a very strategic statement to make because it allowed the university to raise funds to Christianize Native people from institutions both in the colonies and back in England. So from its very founding, Harvard takes a stance of negatively impacting Native communities of this region, not just in the land and space it takes up, but also in the acts that it takes. So the Indian College is created in the middle 1600s. It is one of the first brick buildings built on Harvard Yard. And 5 young men from local communities come to be educated here. Only one ends up graduating. The rest pass away prior to graduation. Caleb Chishitimuk is the first Native graduate of Harvard College in 1665. The next person from my community to graduate from Harvard College was until 2011. So Harvard benefits greatly from this work and doesn't necessarily pay it forward in any meaningful way for Native communities. But what that means is that Harvard, in its charter, in the living document that still governs us today, it has that responsibility, and that is the foundation of the work that HUNAP does. So we are an institution or a program that stretches across the institution. We do recruitment and outreach for all the 13 schools. We run major programming across the whole university. One major kind of very public piece is the Harvard Powwow, which is this year was in its 27th iteration. We had over 3,500 people show up for that one-day event. But we also do a lot of student support. So if we go to the next slide, we have a lot of, back one. Oh, well, we have a lot of student groups. We have one in every school on campus, some that are more active than others. But it's a really important space to understand that coming to a historically significant and colonial institution is not easy for Native people. And so the understanding that a level of support is needed for those folks to find belonging and to be both culturally and personally and academically successful is really imperative. That's a really important role that we play. So that's anywhere from amazing programming that happens in our office on Story Street, from beading to sewing to food and community, to really important speakers that are brought in by our student groups. And so it's a really important piece for our students to be seen, not only in the HUNAP space, but to have that be projected across the entire university. Currently, there are about 280 self-identified Native or Indigenous students at Harvard across the entire university. But here you see some of the student groups that are there. So Natives at Harvard College, or NAC, is our largest group, and it represents Native folks at the college. But then you see some other graduate focused programs as well. Some that are centrally located that support grad students across the entire university, and some that are specific to schools that are currently active. But this is a really important piece. I would say that in addition to this, what support looks like for the Native community at Harvard is that the larger Harvard community can and should better understand Harvard's history and its impact on Native people. Because without that, a lot of the programming, a lot of the conversation happens in silos and parallel to the Native experience. And so when you come to a space where you have an understanding or an experience that feels very disconnected from the people around you, what does belonging truly look like outside of the small community that is created for you by HUNAP? So we as an institution, one, have a very direct responsibility to Native and Indigenous people, but we also have a great amount of resources and expertise that could benefit Native communities and Native individuals. And so how do we as community members think about that responsibility and then also act on it as well? And that's some of the work that we've started to do at HUNAP as well with direct tribal diplomacy. So we work directly with the president and the provost's office on consultation with tribal leaders from local communities. We're actually having our next meeting with them the first week of November, really thinking through how do we inform the work that we do directly from those communities and the leaders that were elected by them. So that's kind of the crash course on HUNAP. But thank you all. I really appreciate you creating some time for me as well.
Thank you very much, Jordan. And to all of our panelists and attendees, an important part of today's panel is centering the voices and stories of Indigenous women, not just to honor their resilience, but to understand their struggle and learn how we can help in their cause and to support their empowerment. I'd like to take a moment of silence online and here in the room to just absorb all of the takeaways, all the stories, all the answers, everything that we're taking away. So if we can just take a moment of silence and think of a word or phrase that highlights what was most important to you today, what you're going to be taking with you as a call to action on this topic. So if we can all just take a moment of silence. As you think of your word or your phrase as a takeaway, all of you online can add it in the chat. And for us in the room, I would like you to just start saying it out loud. So one word for me is hope. If you could just stand up and speak it. Listening. Okay.
Relationships.
Relationships.
Brenda, other than that, it's
Matriarchy.
Okay, matriarchy, beautiful. One more time. Acknowledgement. Beautiful.
Shared humanity.
Shared humanity, beautiful. What else?
intersectionality.
Intersectionality.
Resilience.
Resilience.
Trust.
Trust. Well, anybody else? Aliza, could you name some of the ones in the chat?
Yes, definitely. Connection, empathy, deep listening, matriarchy, hopeful, mother is law, heritage. Some really good ones here. Yes. I thought of honor.
Okay, great.
And yeah, compassion.
Thank you. Those are all very beautiful, and that's how we know that our time together has been useful, has been promising, and that we've really connected. Like Jill said earlier, an important part is connection and relationship, and I feel that we've done that today. So thank you again to all of our speakers, and I would like to invite up our Global We President, Barbara Brenda Pascal, to give us our concluding remarks for today's event.
Thank you, Estera, and thank you everyone for this very powerful, educational, and informative and thought-provoking discussion. I would like to thank our esteemed panelists for taking the time to join us today, both in person and online. Thank you to Jill, Therese, Jordan, as well as Mama Bear and Brenda. Thank you all so very much for your time today and for sharing with us how we can work together toward empowering women in Indigenous communities, not only here in the United States, but all over the world. And that's what Global We is about. We're a global community and coming together from different backgrounds, different perspectives, hearing and learning and taking this with us and doing wonderful things with the information that we gathered today. That's what this is all about. A year ago during our board retreat, we voted as a board to focus our programming on 2 themes this year. One of them was freedom from violence. The other one was education. And you heard about both of these 2 themes today through the discussions that we had with the speakers and panelists and also some of the questions. These themes are also overlapping other themes, which include women's health, political rights and participation, and economic empowerment. These are the 5 themes of Global We that we hope to incorporate in all of our programs and discussions. I want to send, of course, a big thanks to the Global We Board of Directors, as well as to Programs Vice Chair Estera and Programs Chair-elect Rupal Thakur for bringing this event together and recruiting the speakers and just coming up with this great presentation. Really thank you for your time and effort on this. We also want to take an opportunity to invite everyone to upcoming events of Global We in December, including a discussion circle, as well as a holiday social. We are also looking for volunteers for our essay contest, which is a global essay contest looking for readers for students' essays about the challenge or the question of what is the biggest challenge facing women and girls in your country today. So if any of you are inspired by this discussion and want to help with our essay contest and volunteer, please let us know. And we also, anyone who's interested in volunteering with Global We have a new mentoring program this year, and we have a lot of other programming that we're starting to build out. So if you have any ideas, if you like this conversation and want to hear more of it, please reach out to us and give us that idea or information. As well, if you want to sign up to receive our newsletter and our emails, if you don't already receive them, hglobalwe.org, Harvard Global We, hglobalwe.org is our website, and we also are present on social media. At Global We, our aim is to focus on issues affecting women globally. And if you're passionate about this, please let us know, because this idea came from one of our board members, and other board members brought this idea to life. So please let us know. And finally, if you're interested in staying afterwards, for those who are here in person, we do have some cookies and tea and coffee. So please stick around for a little while longer. We have the room a little while longer. Yeah, I'm gonna have Estera say one more thing before we officially close out. Go ahead.
Hi, so I wanted to invite all you who are on campus or close in Boston. We have our annual expo that is coming up in like April, late March, early April. We're still deciding on the exact date. But if you'd like to be involved, if you'd like to volunteer, kind of help us plan that, that would be great. We'd love your help, and I'll be here after and can speak to you if you'd like to join. And also, I think for all of you online who really want to help with Expo and all of our programming, like Barbara said, please reach out to us, and we'd be happy to have you join our team. We love when we can all join together to create great programming like today.
Yes, thank you, Estera. It was a great point. And I'll just say in closing that this is a volunteer-led organization. We couldn't do it without all the volunteers. There are countless people who help make today's event possible, because it's not as easy as you think to have a hybrid event in a space that isn't designed for hybrid events. So we do thank everyone for making this event possible, and we hope that you all stay safe, have a good day, and please stay connected to us. Thank you all very much. Have a great day.